Hello, my name is Andrew. I'm an organizer with Augusta Tenants Union, and today I'm going to be delivering training. This is the training that's required by Augusta Tenants Union to come out in any activities that we do with tenants. So, without further ado, we'll begin. So, disclaimer before I get into anything else, Augusta Tenants Union is not a legal aid organization. The information provided in this training does not and is not intended to constitute legal training or qualify one to issue legal advice. Instead, all information, content, materials available in this training are for general organizing informational purposes only and at best qualify you to know as much as me, and that is not saying a lot. So, who is a tenant? We're giving the training for Augusta Tenants Union. Start by defining who tenants are. A tenant is anyone in any situation where they are not in control of their housing situation. This includes, but is not limited to, housed, unhoused, incarcerated, so on and so forth. So why would tenants need a union? Well, what is a tenants union? Tenants unions are differentiated from housing organizations. Oh, and as I'm reading through this, you'll notice I'm not going to read everything verbatim. This training document should come along with this video. So if you need any further explanation that I don't give here in this video, you can refer to the training document. If you come out to Augusta Tenants Union events, tenant unionists will be there. And if you have any further questions, you can ask them as well. This is just a kind of a crash course to get you up to speed. So going back to the training, tenant unions differentiate themselves from housing organizations based on their differentiating strategies and the goals of these two distinct organizations. A housing organization will be filled with primarily and mainly activists. It deals with policymakers and developers and uses official channels to gain a seat at important tables. Basically, it's trying to negotiate with the system, to change the parameters of the system, to get the system to behave appropriately from within, that sort of thing. The tenant union, on the other hand, is more of a, if that's the inside, this is the outside approach. It's primarily comprised of tenants. It uses tenant committees and neighborhood locals. So basically, whatever committees that we form or we help tenants to form use their own power directly. And it has a target and demand driven direct action approach to change, which we will get into. It's kind of the point of this training. So why a tenants union strategy over a housing org strategy? Tenants often begin in an isolated starting place where we are reliant on the state to help us take on issues. Issues like leaks or, slumlords and that sort of thing. When tenants look to each other to build collective solutions to their problems, they create the most secure chance for both a short and long-term way out of these issues that we may have otherwise have faced alone. And the reason for this is being when the system fails you, if you have tools outside of the system that can either pressure the system from outside to act correctly or to solve the issues yourself or to pressure the players within the system to act directly, even if the system itself can't be made to make them act directly, then all those extra options create more stability in your struggle to be treated correctly, whether it's, having leaks fixed, pests addressed, so on and so forth. Remember, it's important to note that these are just different and they imply different long-term cultivation of institutional abilities and different needs. So we call all of this differentiating strategy class struggle. Sorry. So what is class struggle? So it's important to define some terms whenever we're talking about this. First of all, the tenant union defines politics as anything that happens where human beings get together and have group decision making. That is a side of politics. So you'll have classroom politics, you'll have family politics, you'll have workplace politics, you'll have government politics. All of these are political because they all involve group decision making. So class here is any group of anytime that there's a group of decision makers and a group of decision takers. So you'll see here it just means really classification. It's how we're classifying people in this conversation about politics. Um, oh, geez, I'm sorry. Grammarly is like popping up on me. Uh, where we at? Yeah, whenever we're classifying people in the political arena, um, that is what we mean by class. So you've heard of economic class in the past. And as it's used here, it's not just used to mean income equality. It's much deeper. It's a social relationship between decision makers, as I said, and decision takers in the economy, also known as the employing and owning class versus the working and employed class. Those are just classes of decision makers and takers. So therefore, knowing that, it likewise follows that the landlord-tenant relationship, the citizen-politician relationship, and yes, of course, the employee-employee relationship are all fundamentally political and examples of class society. Tenant unionism comes into that situation. It seeks to create tenant-powered tools of decision making that the tenants themselves can exert and use to influence class society. And we call that democracy. Other forms of oppression, such as racial and gendered oppression, are not peripheral to this. They're not auxiliary to this. They are central to class struggle, and uh, they have been leveraged to form and shape class struggle as much as they've been subject to class struggle. So therefore, tenant organizing cannot afford to be race and gender blind. Um, just so you know, those issues are active issues in any side of class struggle. So what is direct action? Um, part again, big part of what the point of this training is to explain direct action strategies. But essentially, it can be distilled down to things like strikes, demonstrations, other forms of public protests, rather than mere negotiation. Uh, and that mere is an opportune word to achieve a certain outcome. So it's not that negotiation wouldn't be involved in these things. Oftentimes, you'll see a demand letter being given to the landlord is a huge part of our process. And having negotiations is essential because if people don't know what you want, then they don't know how to appease you. Um, that said, it's not merely a matter of diplomacy. It's also an antagonistic. There's an antagonistic aspect to it. You know, people don't want to adhere to the rules. People don't want to adhere to, good sense and morality when it comes to the way they treat their tenants. Well, making their lives uncomfortable in entirely legal ways, through things like phone zaps, calling their friends, calling their neighbors, things like demonstrating outside of their church. All of these sorts of things are within the purview of direct action. Um, Again, like I said, entirely above ground. This is not a, we're not encouraging anyone to do illegal things, and in fact, everything we do is entirely protected within the Constitution. Normally, whenever I issue this training, it'd be question time, but you can't ask the questions. So I'll see you out there in person. You can ask your questions then. Um, so when it comes to mapping the neighborhood, the neighborhood's going to be made of landlords, tenants, um, and they have let's get more into their social relationship that they have. The landlord collects rent, and whenever they do, it's because the tenant paid rent. And so you can see that there's a push and pull here. There's a sort of zero sum aspect to this, where whenever the landlord wins, the tenant loses, and whenever the tenant wins, the landlord loses. So the landlord wants property values to rise so they make more money, and their long-term investment will pay off greater and greater. Whereas the tenant, whenever the tenant who is subject to the landlord, specific kind of person here that we're talking about, whenever the property that they're living in rises, they lose money because they face rent hikes and potentially displacement. The landlord's relationship to the neighborhood is often absent or soon to leave. It's precarious at the very least. They're not interested in staying there long term if it doesn't mean that they're making money. And in fact, they will sell in order to make money oftentimes. The tenants, their relationship to the neighborhood is that they form the social fabric of the neighborhood. They are the neighborhood, physically speaking. The landlord's long-term interest in the neighborhood is the housing, and it wants them to appreciate the value of them to appreciate over time and have a secure investment. The tenant's long-term interest in the housing is perpetual insecurity, or they have a relation, they have an experience of perpetual insecurity. Um, they and individual home ownership becomes less and less likely the longer that they're renting, because you're putting money in the hands of investors, and what are they going to do with that money? They're going to buy up properties. Um, so then further mapping of the neighborhood, you have developers and city government. Um, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm trying to make this an abridged training, but suffice to say, these are more people who don't necessarily make up the direct material social fabric of the neighborhood. So here's some organizational studies. These are basically just examples of times when this sort of training has been successful, and where it comes from, sort of the history of it and that sort of thing. This trend started, as far as it can be traced, back to Seattle Solidarity Network, which was a branch off of the International Workers of the World, and they started the sort of training approach that we're issuing here. They started implementing that with various sites of struggle, namely one of them that was successful, tenant unions. And it led to, basically, we'll skip to the short of it, Houston Tenants Union. They had a couple of successes. Um, Out of Houston Tenants Union and the successes there, um, organizers, me, came from Houston Tenants Union and joined with activists and tenants in Augusta, and we created Augusta Tenants Union. We've had successes in Augusta. I'd get into it, but the short explanation of it is here. We've delivered letters and won demands. We're currently in a struggle right now. I won't get into too much detail, but we've drafted a letter. We've gotten signatures on it. We have yet to deliver the letter. Um, anyway, let's get into the anatomy of a campaign. There we go. So what makes up a campaign? This is kind of a refresher, a little bit on what we've talked about. It's made of tenants, tenant unionists, the demands that the tenants come up with, the targets, meaning the people in positions of power who can change and make the changes, i.e. meet the demands that the tenants have. The landlords oftentimes are those targets. Management can be a target as well. Then there is an event called the demand delivery, where we deliver the letter. There is the demand letter itself, of course. There's committees, which are the groups of tenants and their own internal democracy and their own internal power that the tenant union tries to help them cultivate. There's locals, which is just groups of tenant unionists in a single neighborhood or a side of town. It's just a way to divide things up. There's the tenant union itself, which can be citywide. It doesn't have to be limited to locals, and in fact, sometimes it will be. It'll cross county lines, that sort of thing. Um, and then there's the tactics, which we've gone over as direct action, um, carefully planned tactics. So again, question break. Again, I'm trying to speed through things. Again, ask me in person. Um, but again, also, feel free to read this document. Feel free to pause the video and read things. Feel free to read through it before the video, after the video, so on and so forth. The timeline of the campaign, this is sort of just to etch out sort of a mental model of the order that things are going to go in, generally speaking. The tenant union is first going to try to find struggles. It'll do flyering and outreach. It'll find somebody with a problem and it will meet with them. It'll do the steps that are going to be explained here very shortly later. The steps that lead to things like demand letters and direct action. The tenant union will decide whether to take on the struggle, whether it's a winnable fight, whether we have anything that we can offer them. Sometimes, we're incapable of helping, and we have to be honest about that. The demand delivery and then the push. So we'll deliver the letter. We'll begin our tactics and our strategy. The campaign will escalate. So you don't start with your most extreme direct action measures possible first. You want to work towards that. You want to start with something simple, as simple as actually the demand letter itself is a kind of escalation. It's escalate, because one of the things that we talk to tenants about is like, hey, have you brought these issues up to your landlord in the past? Because if the landlord hasn't been given an opportunity to fix them or to explain why they can't fix them or anything, then it's kind of an unwarranted jump to go from there's a problem, so let's immediately start like petitioning the people at your church to socially ostracize you for not for running a slum. I didn't even know I had a slum. Well, so we encourage the tenants to give the landlord the courtesy of at least an ask, and part of the point of the demand letter delivery is itself to do so as well, to notify the landlord and to get things moving. And so then that will escalate over time if the landlord doesn't give in. And then we will, uh, uh, oh, excuse me, we will adapt the campaign as it goes on. Anything, it's always a moving target. We will always update the strategy with new information, with new developments. You keep things uh, flexible, and then you win, right? That's the goal, is to win. You push until you win, and if you haven't won, you're not done pushing. As long as it's winnable, which is a part of the reevaluation. Like if it just becomes totally unwinnable, we would reevaluate that. Hasn't happened yet though. Again, question break, and now let's get into the actual methodology here. So this whole part above, this was all about preparing for the demand delivery and understanding, generally speaking, what it is, what we do, who we are. With that basic concept in mind, knowing that we are a tenant run organization looking to create tenant power for tenants to make decisions in and of themselves and use their own capacities to leverage to win the gains that they're not winning uh, within the system as it is. Knowing that, with that in mind, the second half is the methods that we use to help tenants do that, and to encourage tenants to do that, and to organize tenants to do that. And it can be broken down into an acronym: agitate, educate, inoculate, or organize, unionize. Um, these are not blueprints. These are frameworks. They are tools to be used actively. And in order to use a tool, you have to think about what you're doing. You can't just, like, oh, I'm going to build a house, start hitting a piece of wood with a hammer. It doesn't build a house. You have to hammer into nails. You have to draft up blueprints. You have to clear the land, so on and so forth. And the same sort of thing applies here. We have to consciously think about what we're doing and use these frameworks in order to achieve rationalized goals. So, first step in the framework, agitate, um, is for the purposes of, no, it's not for the purpose of just being a hard sell. We're not trying to just drum up emotions. What we're doing is not planting anger. It's about clearing a path for someone's legitimate anger to emerge. And this is incredibly crucial. The fact that this is a first step is, speaks for itself. If the tenant does not have a problem, then there is no problem. Okay? If you cannot convince a tenant to have a problem with their landlord, nor should you. If the tenant does have a problem with their landlord that they can't address on their own, and they can't address with minimal help, that's the point of this campaign, is to intervene in that situation. We're not trying to imagine that situation into being. It has to actually be the case. So in that on that note, 80% of what we do is listen. 20% of what we do is speak. Mostly we are listening, and we are clearing the path to listen more. We're trying to get the tenant to communicate with us. If the tenant doesn't have a problem, then that's really, there's nothing you can do to make them have that. So listen 80% of the time, talk 20% of the time. Listening is the bulk of this step, agitation. Um, and these steps are reciprocal. You'll be coming back to agitating all the time. Every step along the way is something that you'll repeat constantly. People want to be heard, so pay attention to them. Okay, so it's real easy to do this step. Just people want to have someone listen to them. Just do that. Remember that fear is present from the beginning, and outrage is often the first but not the last step in overcoming that fear. So a big portion of this agitation step is not just so that you know what the problems are. The tenant has to tell you so that you can begin to help them fix those problems. But it's also so that the tenant can connect with the one tool that they have to do something about it. Because if the system has failed them up to this point, it's probably the case that they're afraid. They remember we said at the beginning that they start from a disempowered position relative to the person who owns it. Owning property means that you make decisions over it. And not owning property, like being a tenant, means you don't make those decisions. And so you're in a disempowered relationship with the person who owns that property. Um, so people rightfully fear evictions and rent hikes. um, Being courageous doesn't mean that fear goes away. It just means that we've connected with a reason to fight against those things. Second step, education, and I'll try to speed this along. The purpose of education is simply to drive the idea that social solutions of people power are possible and that organization is an option on how to achieve that. Basically, education is, if agitation is like tell me if you have a problem and they say yes, education is, here is the solution of unionism and direct action and those sorts of things. Um, so the point of this is just it must come after they've stated there's a problem. And an important part of this is to be honest, try to depend on the natural organizer within the tenant and appeal to that. Excuse me, sorry. Put forward direct action as evidence based. So those examples up here, read through these. Um, these aren't the only examples of direct action in unions winning victories as well. It should be noted that workplace unions and the victories that they win, and that's also an example of direct action and unionizing winning gains. But also outside of that, CSOL, ATU, and Houston Tenants Union are not the only tenant unions in existence. There's tenant unions all across this country. There's tenant unions from Washington to LA and everything in between. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, go look into other examples of victories that tenant unions have undertaken. If you spend some time in the union, maybe the example, the struggle that we're in right now will. Sorry about that. Maybe the struggle. Sorry again. Maybe the struggle that we're in right now will have some victories, and you can use those in your repertoire in the future to explain, to educate the success of tenant unionization. But again, read those examples. We scrolled too far. So after education comes inoculation. This is a very important step, and these first three steps, they almost happen on top of each other. You're going back and forth between them all the while, especially in your early conversations, but also throughout the entire campaign. So we have an ethical duty, but also a strategic impetus to make it clear to people the risks that they are taking by engaging in direct action and unionism, and the potential tactics that landlords are going to use against us when we organize. The tenant is the biggest resource on this because they know things, they know the lay of the land better than you going into things. Um, but inoculation is about overcoming fear in a practical way that does not invalidate it. It's very important to not invalidate fears. We're not bulletproof. Don't pretend like there's no struggle to be had here. There is a very real struggle, but we can only build stronger feelings of confidence and trust and solidarity to overpower them. Think of inoculation in broad and indirect ways, such as small reminders that the tenant's cause is just and righteous, and potential retaliation from landlords may include, and here we have a list of things. You should probably take this list with you. It's got random things, harassment, withheld deposits, outrageous fees. Let the tenants know that these are real possibilities of things that can happen to them, and let them know that we have solidarity with them and that we will show up for them. That together, those two things, the fact that we're a group, the fact that we're not in isolation, and the fact that there's a problem that they're upset about, is how they get over the fear. But this list here are the things that they should be afraid of. So all of this has to be totally out and open, and the landscape has to be totally laid bare in order for this organizing to be successful. Um, Assuming that we do have proper inoculation, education, agitation, the tenants think that there's an issue. They've heard of the collective solution and they are interested in it. They've been properly, informed. They have total like informed consent on going forward with it. They feel confidence and trust in you. You feel solidarity with them, and you have a collective effort. Then you begin to organize. Um, and one of the things that you first organize is you take all those complaints from the agitation step and you turn them into a demand letter. Like the things that the tenants complain about are the things that the tenants are demanding to change. You don't add you don't make up extra things to put there, okay? And you don't leave things out. If the tenant thinks it's important and worth putting on the demand letter, you should put it on there. It's very important that we not be paternalistic, but we instead be mutualistic. We understand that the tenants are our allies in a mutual struggle, because the tenant union helps us as tenant unionists anytime we have issues with our landlords, and vice versa. The tenant union helps the tenants to become tenant unionists themselves and to help themselves, and also be helped mutually by the tenant union, and then join the tenant union, which is part of the organization unionization steps, right? So remember, our goal is to organize with people together mutually, not for them. We're not saviors, right? We're fellow combatants in a struggle. Um, Support a tenant that is willing to take a leading role. Find the natural leaders within um, the body of tenants, people who are prone to it, and encourage them. Um, Remember, this stage here, this organization stage, it can be the most labor intensive. It's a constant slog at times. Remember to communicate and do agitation, education, inoculation as you move forward constantly with organizing. Some of us will need reminders that our feelings are valid and that there's a way out together, and that we're here for each other. It's important to go back through these steps over and over again. Meet the tenants where they're at, and the cliche is true. Tenants do not come as ready-made organizers. We have to accept them as they are if we want fighting spirit to transform into tenant unionism. Which means that if you can't find obviously ready organizers there, or people who are more prone to it to the others, you have to try to cultivate it within them. Share these skills with them. Give them this training if they're interested in it, or if not, I mean, just help them in whatever way you can to become organized and to help their fellow tenants organize. Um, and so by just simply doing these steps, it doesn't automatically result in union. Organizing with tenants doesn't build the union alone. And it is not that every previous stage is a verb and we simply arrive at union. We have to constantly try to weave their fights together and link up with other disjointed struggles. So members of this union um, ultimately need to come from the ranks of the tenants that we help organize. Um, we're not just, we're not housing organizations. We're not necessarily, I mean, there's nothing wrong with someone that might meet this description joining the union, but we're not necessarily activists who are just doing this as a hobby. We are tenants ourselves, first and foremost. We're not landlords. That's maybe something I probably should have mentioned earlier. Landlords are not allowed in the tenant union as a basic measure. If you are in control of someone else's living situation, um, in a way where you're drawing, profit from that, you're not allowed to participate. Um, so we have to constantly try to weave fights together and link up otherwise disjointed struggles. We want tenants to involve themselves into other campaigns, basically, is what that means. And the union is a way to facilitate that involvement. The point is not to simply make them more long-term organizers for Augusta Tennis Union. It's the real relationships based on solidarity that matter, though. Formal membership, therefore, is not the priority. Um, uh, we just want to reproduce them as organizers and in solidarity and in community with everyone else. Um, There's more to a union than membership card that you carry. Uh, this part, it's kind of abstract compared to some of this other stuff, but it's important to note that encouraging continued involvement in future campaigns and leave the door open for Augusta's Tennis Union and those who keep fighting, winning to go wherever they see that happening. So they don't have to. It's not that the union is like a filter that like catches them and like forces them to coordinate through us. If they want to coordinate outside of us, that's fine. We just want to encourage the continued participation and solidarity with other campaigns. Eventually, if this city is fighting, all the citizens and tenants of the city are fighting for each other, then they'll be in a much better situation. Once they're advocating for each other. The rest of this is really in the weeds. If this is very interesting to you, feel free to read through this. There's some really cool recommendations from this. I didn't put this together exclusively. ATU didn't put this together exclusively. A lot of this we inherit from Houston Tenants Union. So you see here, carry flyers with you and talk HTU everywhere. The next fight might be the person standing in front of you at the grocery store, bus stops, and busy corners branded with ATU flyers, stickers, and soapboxing, etc. Like some of this is like this. There you go. I mean, yeah, we took some of this from Houston Tenants Union. Or I took some of it from Houston Tenants Union. We've added to this as well. So this is Seesaw's wisdom, this is HTU's wisdom, this is the IWW's wisdom, and this is ATU's wisdom, all distilled. And so like feel free to read through all this. And that's it. That's the training. You're now okay to join ATU and its events. See you there.